Hi everyone, Stepan here. It's Thursday, so welcome to another Thursday endgame video. Today I'm going to go over queen versus pawn endgames, and I've asked my patrons to suggest endgame and middlegame videos, and Theodore asked for queen versus queen endgames or queen endgames, where one side is a pawn up. Now to get to that, I have to cover the basics, so today I'm going to go over endgames which most people think they know them, but I'm sure that since I've seen very strong players mess them up, I've seen an IM mess up one of these, I'm sure that there will be something new for you here. And please comment below if you know all of these rules. I didn't know them before I studied them, even though I thought I knew. Okay, we are going to go over endgames in which one side has a queen, one side has a pawn. Now, as you know for sure, there can be some tricks which could lead to stalemate or to a draw. So this is definitely defensible in some positions, but there is a lot of stuff you have to know. First, let's go over pawns which haven't arrived to the 7th rank yet. So pawns which are more than one square away from promotion, they are always winning. So regardless of where the queen is, where the attacker's king is, where the defender's king is, if the pawn is not on the 7th rank yet, doesn't matter which file it's on, it's always winning. As we know, as you're going to see, most rook pawn endgames against the queen are a draw, because there is no way for the attacker to make progress. However, if the pawn hasn't reached the 7th rank yet, then it's an easy win. And let me give you one example. There's a million ways to win this. For example, queen d5 check, king to b2, let's say queen to b5 check, let's say king to a2, and now the king is given one square. You have to be wary of stalemate, basically. That's the only trick. So king to b7, in this position king to a1. Played here, one way to win is queen c5. I will show you that, but just let me just show you a way to mess up. So for example, king to a6 and a2, and if you play king to a5, then it's stalemate, so don't stalemate. But okay, king to a1, queen to c5, for example, attacking the pawn, forcing the pawn forward. Now again, if you put the queen on the b file, then that would be stalemate, but queen c1 is checkmate. Again, there are many ways to win this position. So rook's pawn, which hasn't reached the 7th rank yet, is always winning. The reason why I'm showing this first is because rook pawns on the 7th are a draw 99% of the time. Okay, now let's do bishop pawns. As you probably know, bishop pawns on the 7th rank are often a draw because of a trick we are going to see later on. However, when the pawn hasn't reached the 7th rank, it's always winning. Same as with rook pawns, regardless of where the kings are, regardless of where the queen is. If the pawn is on any of these squares, any file on the board, if it hasn't reached the 7th rank yet, it's a win. So again, I'll show you one way to win. Again, there are a million ways to win this. So queen e5, pinning the pawn. This trick we are always going to see with pawns which are not bishop or rook pawns when the pawn is on the 7th rank. This is the way to make progress, so bear that in mind. So king to c2. And now you simply march your king forward, king to c6, king to d2. What you don't want to allow is you don't want to allow the pawn to the 7th rank, because then it could easily be a draw. So queen d4 check, forcing the king behind the pawn again. King to c5, getting your king closer. King to b3, probably the only move. Queen to b4 check, king to c2, and now king to c4. On the next move you will win the pawn and then win the game. Okay, so those are 6th rank pawns and below. Doesn't matter which file it's on, doesn't matter which square is on, which rank it's on unless it has reached the 7th rank. Okay, now pawns on the 7th rank are winning unless they are on bishop or rook pawns and in specific circumstances. Rook pawns are mostly drawn, bishop pawns are, I would say, drawn 70% of the time. Any other pawn, so knight, queen and king pawns, are always winning. And there is one technique which you have to apply, which I think you can practice that against the strongest engine or something, or against your friend. It's sort of a zigzag maneuver where you pin the pawn to the king and then force the king behind the pawn. You want the king to get to b1 in this case, so that you have a free tempo to get your king closer. You cannot win with your queen alone. So what you have to do is you have to bring your king to one of these 3 squares. In order to do that, you will have to check your opponent in a way that forces him to get behind the pawn every now and then, every few moves. And once the king gets behind the pawn, so in this case on b1, then he is not threatening to promote the pawn with b1 equals queen. Therefore, you have a tempo for your king to approach. So let's try to do that again. A million ways to win this. The principle is what matters. You can always restart. There is really very few mistakes you could make. And let's start with queen e2 check, king to c1. Again, he doesn't want to go behind the pawn because then he's not threatening the queen, so the defender should threaten to queen on every turn. Queen c4 check. You can go to b1, you can also go to d1, let's say b1, and now the king has now the king is behind the pawn, so now we get our king closer, so king to b7. King to a1, threatening to promote again. Queen to a4. Remember what we have to do. We have to force the king behind the pawn. So king to b1. And again, if the king has covered itself behind the pawn, then we approach king to c6. Oh, sorry. Or king to b6. Doesn't matter. King to a6 also works. Let's say king to c6. Okay, king to c1, again threatening to promote. Queen to c4 check. Again, if the king goes to b1, then we approach with our king. So let's say king to d2, a bit of variety. Queen to b3 now threatening to take the pawn. So king to c1 is forced. And now this is sort of the picture you have to have in your head. You check him and force him behind the pawn, and he has no other choice. So in this case, king to b1 is the only move. Otherwise, he loses the pawn. So king to b1. And again, we have a tempo for our king to approach. King to a2, threatening to promote. Queen to c2, pinning the pawn to the king. And now we are doing the same thing. The king is now behind the pawn, so he's not threatening the queen. King a1, queen to c3, again pinning the pawn to the king. The king can either go to a2 or to b1. Let's say king to a2. And now after king to a4, unless your opponent, if your opponent doesn't go behind the pawn this way and allows your king to get to one of these three squares, then there's a nice mating trick which you have to know, because this is a possible defense, and if you're inexperienced with queen versus pawn games, then you might fail to beat this defense. So with this pattern after king to a2, you simply go into the opposition with your king, and now he doesn't have a choice basically. If the king moves, then the pawn is not threatening to promote, so you can approach. So let's say here, and he only has one move and then mate. Okay, and if the pawn promotes, which may seem like white has blundered, then queen a3 checkmate. So there are two ways to win. There are two ways to win against one pawn, which is not on a bishop or a rook file. The easiest way is this: he goes here, and then he goes here, and then you go here, and then he goes here, and then you mate. Or he goes for this defense, king a2, and then you go king a4, he has to promote, and then you mate. Okay, now let's look at a position in which the defender has a rook pawn. This position is a draw. There is only one exception, and that's when the attacker's king is near enough to threaten mate in one move. And I'm going to show you what I mean first, before we get to the drawn position. So in this position, the king is threatening to get either to a3 or to b3. So when we check, and the king goes to the corner, okay, now we play king to b3, and now it's checkmate. And it's not stalemate, he has to go to b1, and then queen d1 is mate, queen b2 is mate, anything is mate. Queen e1 is mate. Okay, so remember that not all king and pawn versus queen endgames when the pawn is on the rook file are drawn. So if you're trying to reach this position to force a draw, make sure that your opponent's king is not too close. Okay, now the drawing technique is really simple. Let's say white tries to win, queen b5, and the king goes to the corner. Now, you cannot approach with your king, and that's the main idea. You don't have a tempo for your king to approach because it's stalemate. If you move your king, then it's stalemate. Okay, so after king a1, white has to move his queen away from the b file so that the king can get out. So now king to b2, let's say queen to f2 check, king to b1. He's threatening to promote on every turn. You don't have a way to pin the pawn because you cannot put your queen on a, b, c minus, whatever. There is no room on the other side of the board, so you're doomed and you have to keep checking. So king to b2, for example, queen to b4, for example, king to a1. Now again, if you approach with your king, it's stalemate, so you have to move your queen. So queen c3, king b1, let's say queen e1, check, king to b2, queen to d2, check. Now, one trick the defender has to watch out for is a mate on c1. In this case, same goes for f1, f8, and c8. So when your opponent is on the d file, if your pawn is on the a file, and when your opponent is on the e file, when your pawn is on the h file, don't go to the corner because that's checkmate. So if you play king a1 here, trying to be resilient, then queen c1 mate is, well, bad. So when he plays queen d2 check, you just play normally with king to b1. There is no way to make progress. Again, you're threatening to promote, so queen d3, king a1, whatever happens, it's a draw. Okay, so this is how you draw with the rook pawn. Okay, and we saw that it can be winning if the attacker's king is too close. Now, bishop's pawn are the most complicated, and these you have to study because there are 3 different positions you have to know. One position is an easy draw for the defender. That happens when the king is on the short side of the pawn. So meaning if you have a bishop pawn, you want your king on a rook file or on a knight file, because that's the side of the board where you are going to perform your stalemate trick. The stalemate trick I'm talking about is you get your king to a1 in this case, and white cannot take your pawn on c2 because your king is unable to move its stalemate. Therefore, having the king in this case on d2 or on e2 disables you from doing that, so it could be a winning position because there is no drawing resource with going to the corner and stalemating. The other case when this position is winning is when the attacker's king is too close. Same goes, the same thing that we said for rook files. If the attacker's king is too close, it's really hard to go for the stalemate tricks and you basically lose. Now first let me show you the basic position in which black can easily draw. So let's try to win this. Queen e5 check, king to b1, threatening to promote. You don't want to go to c1, allowing the king to approach. So queen e4, pinning the pawn. Now in this position, you could go to a1 already, and if the pawn is taken, then that's stalemate. Okay, so that's the trick. But let's say you play king to c1, which is a bit imprecise. So then king to b6, let's say king to b2, threatening to promote, queen to e2, pinning your pawn, again, king to a1. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to allow this king too close into the position. So in this position, of course, queen takes c2, again, is a draw. So let's say white tries to check. So queen 1 check, king to b2, queen to d2, again, king to a1, and stalemate. Okay. If, for example, king to b1, then, I don't know, queen to d3, again, king to a1. Oh, yeah, king to a1. Okay, so this is the way to draw. If the king is on the wrong side of the pawn, then this position is complicated and white is winning, but white has to know what he's doing. Now again, if the attacker's king is too far away, so if the king was on b8 or on c8 or on a7 in this position or on b7, then the black king would have enough time to get to this side of the pawn to threaten the stalemate trick on a1. So the king being on the wrong side of the pawn, in this case on d2, in conjunction with the attacker's king being close enough, leads to a win for white. Let me show you how. There are 2 mating patterns and there are 2 ways to win. Okay, the first pattern is starts like this. I'm going to show you. The idea is you check on a3, and that leads to mate. I know it sounds complicated now. Okay, king to d1, threatening to promote. Queen f4, because you don't want to allow the king to c1 and then to get here, because then it could be a draw. Okay, queen d4 check, king to c1. Now you get enough time to get close with your king, so king to c4, king to b1, and now queen to d3. And in this position, if you go to a1, of course, if we take, then again it's stalemate, but this is the mating pattern. If your king is close enough and the king goes to the corner, then you have this pattern. Queen c3 check, king to b1, and king to b3. Okay, and this is the first mating example. And now, of course, if the king goes to c1, then we mate on c2, queen takes c2. So the only move for black is to promote to a queen. Okay, I'm sorry, he could promote to a knight, but then you move your king and then you still win. Okay, c1 equals queen. And now the idea is queen d3 check. The king has to go to a1. If queen to c2, we take it with mate. Okay, so queen to a1. And now queen a6 check, and the last mating move is going to be on a3. So this picture you have to have in your head, and it will always be a queen on c1 or on c8 or f1 or f8, and your queen on a6, a3, h6 or h3, and basically the only move is to block with the queen. So now let's look at that once more. So the first thing we do, we prevent the king from going over to the short side of the pawn. So king to d1. Okay, queen d4 check, king to c1, king c4, we approach with our king, king b1, queen d3, pinning the pawn, king a1, and now not taking the pawn leading to stalemate, but queen c3, king b1, and now king b3. And don't be afraid to allow him to promote. Learn this pattern. Once he gets a queen, you play queen d3 check, he plays king a1, which is the only move, and now queen a6, queen a3, and oh sorry, mate next move, because king b1, queen b2. Okay, now this is the first way you can win against a bishop pawn. The second way is, even if the king is on the short side, on the perfect square on b2, and he would like to go for the trick on a1, then if your king is close enough, it's still winning, because you can create mating threats. So in this case, you simply go queen b6, king c1, and for example, king to d3, and that's it. Okay, if let's say king to d1, then queen g1 mate. So when your king is close enough, it's always winning. You basically want your king close enough to create a mating threat on the next move. Okay, so when the king is on the correct side, you need a mating threat on the next move for it to certainly be winning. Okay, there were a couple of rules in this video. I hope everything was clear enough. Sorry if I made any mistakes. I didn't use the engine for any of this analysis, so it's all my analysis, but I was trying to test my own knowledge. And I hope if there were any mistakes, please point them out. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Next week we are going to be continuing with complex queen versus queen endgames. I just wanted to get through these basics because in many queen and pawn endgames there are going to be races, and many of them are going to end up with a queen versus pawn. So this you absolutely have to master before moving on. Okay, thank you very much, and stay tuned for more chess. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.